Hi everybody out there and welcome on my YouTube channel. Welcome back with our musings about the art of fugue by Johann Sebastian Bach. This video will finish the theoretical base about the overall form of the art of fugue. And last week I found my way to the hair cutter here, so I start this part of our discussion with hopefully a nicer outfit. Okay, and today I have no musical examples in my luggage, but this episode is a crucial one for the more practical parts that follows. We need a place for the last fugue or fugues, and we need a design for the last group or groups. Finally, that's nothing less than an agreement about the architecture of the art of fugue, the completed building in its entire appearance and glory. So this episode will finish the first part of our discussion, and at the end of this episode you will have my layout of art of fugue of before 1080 with all its proportions. You have the complete layout for our musical house with everything we have from Bach, additional with a detailed layout of the missing parts. And I'll give you all my arguments I have, and I share with you the way I went, also the way the sources lead me to my persuasions. And then maybe we can talk. I'm curious about what you think. May you agree? Do you find mistakes on my side? Do you think I've forgotten some grave facts? That's, for me, the essential reason for this video series here. I want to learn. All I'm saying here are results of my own. While there is nobody in my environment, I could reasonably talk about all those details. They are simply too special, even for professional musicians. Therefore, I ask into the world, what do you think? Where I am false, or maybe not false, or inaccurate? What did I forgot? So again, welcome and let's begin. Our project seems to be hopeless, right? After finishing the fragment as a triple fugue in our episode 2, we have no further material from Bach. That's our elephant in the room. So we are now on our own from here and may create the missing parts as a newly created scores. This has nothing longer to do with any kind of completion or reconstruction. It's at least a completely new score based on Bach's material, of course, but a new score. And well, after making the triple fugue from the fragment, we have lastly, due to lack of manuscripts, no other choice. But we will ask Bach's handwritings on every step we are going on, and we will see how far we will come without breaking in. Okay, well, in dialogue with the sources, our situation is not as somber as it seems to be. Okay, we need some agreement about our requirements and about weighting the sources, starting from outside Bach. We first have the Nekrolog. The Nekrolog expresses clearly that Bach did not complete the penultimate fugue, and he did not even started writing the ultimate one, the fugue with the 4 themes. In history, this passage of text often has been ignored or discarded. Well, how truthful is this text? And how truthworthy are their authors? We mentioned this in a further episode. Both authors came from inner circle of Bach family or surrounding. Carl Philipp Emanuel was Bach's second son, and Johann Friedrich Agricola has been student of Bach. So, the main answer, the main question here is, how much weight should I give their text? The answers I find in literature, they are, in my view, sometimes really annoying. You must not like what the Bach son and Agricola write. Yeah? But there are limits and there are no-goes. And one of my disappointments about the handling of the source and the lack of any respect for its authors, I'll share here. That's for me the essay by Zoltán Göncz, he published in Karus edition. In parts, Göncz's text is, in my eyes, a nuisance. See, there's one thing I know with certainty. The Nekrolog is a documented source. So, and I know one other thing. Both authors have been professional musicians. Agricola worked in Potsdam under King Friedrich II. Agricola was author, teacher and composer. So, and Carl Philipp Emanuel, first in Potsdam as well under Friedrich II. He succeeded since 1786 the past Georg Philipp Telemann as church music director in Hamburg. The Berliner or Hamburger Bach, also Carl Philipp Emanuel, was respected as teacher and famous authority in music at all, and in 18th century. He was much more famous than his father. If such persons write about fugues, I assume they know what they are talking about. And well, in Nekrolog, Bach and Agricola had written about fugues. Not about partial fugues, not about section of fugues. They wrote about fugues. But Zoltán Göncz doesn't bother this. So, then he certainly has other documents? No, he has not. But doesn't matter. Göncz knows better than Carl Philipp Emanuel, Bach and Agricola themselves what they both have written about in an attitude towards middle school pupils. I can't say it in another way, yeah? An attitude towards middle school pupils who had forgotten what they wrote in their last homework. Göncz correct their mistakes. Just the red ink is missing. Here, in literally, the penultimate fugue is, as matter of fact, the third section. By the last is the fourth. In example, the permutational matrix and the subsequent inversion matrix. Well, the only resilient matter of fact here is, in my eyes, that Göncz turns the word of two musical authorities from 18th century with close relationship to Johann Sebastian Bach himself, simply from feet to head. He does this just on the base of his own conviction, lacking any reliable document. That's, in best case, bare of every respect towards the sources and the personalities of their authors. And Gönc's idea of permutation fugue is, on background of Bach's live oeuvre, highly questionable. But that's for later on, when we discuss the layout of the score. The question, how much weight should I give the Nekrolog? Despite my anger, let's respect Gönch's opinion. Let us be careful and let's say on this step here, I do not know if Nekrolog's message is correct. Let us hold this for a moment in mind as a further puzzle piece and see how it will fit into our whole mosaic. Okay, outside Bach, what else do we have? All authors share the opinion that the main theme or closer relative is meant as a fourth theme in Quadrupelfugue. This unity seems lastly founded by Gustav Nottebohm's essay from 1881. Where he gave a couple of combinations with all the themes. Some of his suggestions fit Bach's way of writing fugues perfectly. For example, showing all the statuette introduction of the themes, which is typical in Bach's multi-thematic fugues in general. However, this unity among authors is not a given one, as I learned from my professor Wolfgang Stockmeier at Musikhochschule in Cologne. Stockmeier, in example, was not convinced from Nottebohm. In this detail, we couldn't agree. In fact, Stockmeier had seen other reasons for not to see the fragment as part of the art of fugue. Why did Bach write this fragment in piano score, he asks. All other movements are given in scores with one system for each voice. The fragment is a big exception. And indeed, until now, I have no closing answer. I have ideas, but they all are weak. One is a banality. Printing costs may have gotten out of hand. Even the 239 bars Bach had written would take probably about 10 pages if they are printed in score by Schübler. Looking on Greg Butler's 680 pages, this aspect is crucial. Still weaker is another idea for writing a piano score. Bach could have showed in Art of Fugue not only all kinds of fugues and contrapuntal, but he could also show two different methods for writing them down to paper, but that's nothing more than a guessing game. In my eyes and ears, Nottebohm's arguments are strong, so I agree with him that the main theme of Contrapuntal 1 should be indeed intended as a fourth theme inside the Quadrupelfugue, and in consequence, I agree with him and so many others about the fragments belonging to the art of fugue. Admittedly, that is for me actually more effect than just one of the assumed pieces of the mosaic, despite the unsolved questions about piano notation versus score notation. In musical research, we have Rechtsteiner's idea about spreading the canons between the fugues 8 until 11. And we have Greg Butler's result about the 6 empty pages between mirror fugues and canons as a group. We've talked about that. Here just a result from former discussion. As I may not verify nor falsify, I have no closing justice about the correctness of both, but let us treat their results as further pieces in our mosaic, okay? That's from outside Bach. And what do we know with certainty from Bach himself? We have the scores of contrapuntal 1 until 13, and we have them with an overwhelming probability in exactly this ordering. Shall I change here anything? No. My answer, no. We know that the fugues are bound into groups. Yeah, I must not discuss this, we had it. Also, they are bound into groups. Shall I change this? I see no reason for that. We talked about Rechtsteiner. I am not able to justify his proofs he found in the sources. I have only my facsimile. But I recognize that Bach's group architecture must be destroyed if I follow Rechtsteiner's layout. So what's more weightful? My answer is obvious here. Also Rechtsteiner's mosaic piece do not fit to Bach's order. So I take Rechtsteiner out here. Bach's chords and the ordering stay untouched. In consequence, we have the canons as an own group. Okay, what then with Nekrolog and with Butler? Both make until this point no problems and have no contradictions to Johann Sebastian Bach. So no reason for sorting them out. We have another aspect from Bach, and that's the ascending contrapuntal complexity. Question? Respecting the sources, Bach referred this growing structural difficulty to the groups and not to the single movements. Would you agree here? My opinion, Bach must have. In other case, the third group would have the double fugues first and the triple fugues in 3 and 4 voices last. And that's not what we find in Bach's manuscript. And probably you would assume a 4-voiced mirror fugue as more complex than a 3-voiced one. Nevertheless, Bach sets the 4-voice before the 3-voiced fugue, or the mirror fugue. So Bach should have other and inner musical reasons for his chosen order. However, the ascending complexity bound onto groups instead of bound on single movements fits perfectly to what we have as long. First group single fugues, second augmentation diminution fugues, 3 multisymmetric fugues, 4 the mirror fugues, and 5 the canons. What's now with our fragment? We even have seen this earlier. It does not fit into this layout. As a single fugue, it is no group. And it's neither a mirror fugue nor a canon. Here, at this point, our 2 other mosaic pieces helps out. Remember the Nekrolog's message. Yeah? They're talking about the incomplete fugue plus additional 1 fugue which Bach had never written. Taking this seriously, that would lead us to 2 possibilities. The first one is a 6 group with 2 members containing the fragment and the postulated never written last fugue. Yeah? That would be no contradiction to all other contrapunti Bach had written so far, and no contradiction to the group layout, right? But what's with the ascending complexity? Is an augmentation canon more complex than a quadruple fugue? Well, a canon is more strict, as the degree of freedom is reduced in the canon. So this fragment postulated last fugue group has its place before the canon group, but on this level Butler helps out. Yeah? If the canons are last, we have no finale. So, and now referring to Butler, there is simply no room for more than 50 additional bars, yeah, the 6 empty pages. So, and we have seen 50 bars are not even enough to complete the fragment as a quadruple fugue. How should there be place for a postulated additional last fugue? As in case of Rechtsteiner, I may not verify Butler's sources, but Butler is not only is free of contradiction to Bach's layout, but more, Butler supports it. Following Butler and the both Nekrolog authors, Carl Philipp Emanuel, Bach and Agricola, we get this structure here. This graphic unveils one other thing. Presuming the slow and old style first partial fugue from the fragment in Butler's suggested position, the turned around order of the mirror fugues makes sense as well. The four-voiced one, the four-voiced mirror fugue, is a slowly floating melancholical piece, while the three-voiced one comes as a jig, a jumping dance in fast speed. The dance, as a contrast to the sublime fragment's beginning, makes, from musical form as well as from psychological view, sense. It prevents two, and because of the mirror structure, at least three slow motion fugues, one after one in series. So just from the sources and from musicological researches, my final suggestion for the layout of the entire art of fugue is this one. And as last thing, looking on Bach's work and looking on the proportions here, we might specify the condition for the conditions for the missing fugue. For instance, would Bach have written a second fugue with separate single expositions as he did in the fragment? In the works of Max Reger, things are different. But Bach introduces his themes nearly always with contrapuntal companions. Should have Bach, for a postulated closing fugue, deviated from this? This is one of those questions without a 100% valid answer. But first, in most cases, Bach did not use separate expositions for every single theme. It seems not plausible for me. Bach would have written even a set from two of those fugues here. Then second, from a musical formal view, Bach either would have not. In this case, a fugue with 350 until 400 bars would arise again. Yeah, we had in further episode, and such a fugue would break the overall form. And third, from inner musical content, the same answer. Bach would have not, because using the identical layout from the fragment with the four given themes, even Bach probably should repeat himself. Yeah, finally, while dealing with the main theme, he should repeat after presenting these expositions in 7 single fugues in the first part of Art of Fugue. So, I have another suggestion, because Bach had written a perfect template for this missing fugue here inside the other fugue, and that's the design plan of Contrapuntal 8 and 11. And this design plan contains 180 bars in length. Yeah, we will see it later. All these arguments bundled, I finally found an integral layout for the whole art of fugue, consisting of 5 groups in 2 halves. In the end, two multisymmetric fugues embrace inner movements. That's the same structure as in group 3. This structure obviously holds the principle of ascending complexity group focused intact. And the large structure, all in all, we get 11 fugues on the left side bundled into groups 1 to 3 and 10 fugues on the right side bundled into groups 4 and 5. In total, the massive 4-voice triple fugue contrapuntus 11 marks the middle of the art of fugue. 10 fugues from here to both sides. So proportions and balancing works pretty well when we look on the single movements. And looking on the groups, then we have the embracing structure from group 3 twice. One concludes the first half and one augmented version of embracing with more members in mid finish the entire work. The size of odd groups grows, and that takes care about the half-half balance. Also, there are 3 groups versus 2 groups. And if the postulated last fugue would tower over 300 bars, then the right beam of the seesaw would become too heavy. But with 180 bars, as in contrapuntus 11, the proportions are weighted and balanced. Well, the last group is massive, but this has other consequences. In this suggested shape, the last group is a smaller art of fugue inside the entire one, as far as the principles of all previous groups are included here. You see, the first group has 4 single movements. Yeah, the fragment has 3 single expositions. But if the fragment ends with a dominant, with the 5th, and leads seamlessly into the canon, this canon appears like a 4th theme. The 4th canons are 4 single movements as well, and the last quadruple fugue refers with its then 4 themes and its last main theme back to group 1. Group 2, with augmentations and diminutions, should return in the postulated last fugue. We will see this later, and get me right, I do not think the quadruple fugue as a fugue in sense of group 2 here. No, but as Bach always uses the tools he gained in previous groups, then the last group of course should make use of them as well. Also augmentation and so. Yeah, the parallel with the third group, the multisymmetric fugues, this is obvious. Don't need to say anymore here. But the fourth group, in my opinion, the canon in augmentation and contrario moto is the last reference and the climax according to the mirror principle from group 4. From structure, I may see this last canon as a kind of mirrored piece, but additional reduced in liberty and additional enriched with the augmentation principle. Vectors and inverses fall here in 2 voices of the same movement. And with bar 53, Bach starts the alternation of the voices where the discant becomes the bass and vice versa. That's the mirror principle in concentration, isn't it? And if you agree here, you have a further reason why Bach sets the 4-voiced mirror fugue in front of the 3-voiced one. In the augmentation moto contrario canon, the mirror principle is set unto 2 voices. So maybe Bach thought about a 4-3-2 structure And at least a 4-3-2-1 structure as the quadruple fugue contains all the principles from the entire art of fugue in lastly one single movement. Yeah, you notice that the requirements for the postulated last fugue are not getting smaller. Letting the difficulty of getting such a fugue Bach probably never had written for this moment be out. From sources, from Bach's material, from contemporaries, from musical research, there might be no single entity of those given answer about Bach's intention for his last work, for the art of fugue, but all together they support each other. Every aspect gives a response to one special question, and in common altogether they build up the complete mosaic, whereby the not fitting pieces relatively naturally are excluded. I know I'm over time, but one of the most important questions in our context is still unanswered. Why? Why is, in my view, the fragment meant as triple fugue and without the main theme? That, of course, has been the main question from Wolfgang Stockmeier as well as from everybody else. How may be a triple fugue with 3 complete new themes and without any reference to the main theme be part of the art of fugue at all? I must address this before I close this video, also looking at the clock. Please be patient with me for these few minutes, and promised it will be the last few minutes. Shortly, a look on neighbor works from late Bach. Goldberg Variation and Musical Offering. Both present the original thematic material unchanged at the end. I presume the same for the art of fugue. In my word, the main theme should appear in its unmodified very first form. But if Nekrolog authors are right, then this main theme is embedded into a quadruple fugue. And now please look through Bach's glasses here for one moment. For such a fugue, Bach obviously needs 4 themes. But where shall he get them from, referring to the overall form of art of fugue? From previous triple fugues? No, that's impossible. He cannot use the material from here because of the morphing process, the morphing from the first theme. In group 3, the main theme is in mid of its development. Bach created for fugues 8 and 11 appropriate thematic counterpoints fitting to the variant the main theme has here in group 3. But the thematic material of, for instance, contrapuntus 11 does not work with the original shape of the main theme. In groups 1 until 4, that's in 13 contrapunti, there is structurally determined no single occasion for introducing any new material. Everything until here is around the morphing process of the main theme and its growing complexity and groups and so on. But we need a quadruple fugue, right? So, where shall Bach get his needed thematical material from? Well, he should introduce it at some point. So, where? Setting a quadruple fugue without preparation onto the end, the themes would fall down from heaven structurally, no? And the singularity of such a fugue would contradict the group principles. The position suggested from Nekrolog and from Butler is indeed the first and the last and the only position inside the given architecture of Art of Fugue where Bach may introduce new material. And exact this is, in my eyes, the task and the purpose of the fragment in 3 subjecti. Introducing the material for the framework of the last movement, which makes the return of the original main theme at least possible at all. See, without the fragment, Bach could not going back to the original theme 1, shape of contrapuntus 1. Yeah? There is in the whole Art of Fugue no contrapuntal companion for this. The fragment prepares the environment for the later upcoming batches of overlaying themes and back references to contrapuntus 1. Taking Nekrolog serious, Bach cannot write the penultimate fragment as Quadrupelfugue. This is impossible due to the structural framework Bach had given himself, because the morphing process of the main theme is here, also in the position after the mirror fugues, not yet completed. The main theme has to go through the strictness of canonical development, and it has to fulfill the mirror principles in the most concentrated form first, before it then may redeemed, yes, to its original shape. But it never would reach this origin in this quadruple form without the existence of the 3 accompanying themes. Stockmeiers open questions about the fragment's piano notation in mid of regular scores I must left unanswered. I simply do not know. But now you know my response to the questions about the missing main theme. Because in my eyes, Bach created with the fragment the environment to make this climax and the last fulfillment at least possible at all. And that's the inner reason for the power of Nottebohm's essay from 1881. Everything we have talked about, the entire form supports this as well. Group structure, embracement structure, like in third group, rising complexity, morphing of main theme, everything. And about the spiritual dimensions of such a work, Bach wrote at the end of his life, a life full of work and development as well. Yeah, you may think for yourselves. Returning to the school teacher attitude of Sultan Gönc, the last time, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach and Agricola's penultimate and ultimate fugues support a last group as described here. Butler supports it as well. Their requirements preserves Bach's inherent structure from Art of Fugue. Gönc softens it, if not destroys it in the last parts. Could it be that Bach's son and Agricola eventually indeed knew what they had written, and that they maybe didn't need Mr. Gönc for their enlightenment after all? So who should get more weight, Gönc or Agricola Bach? The answer for me is obvious, and so for my part I drop Gönc's idea. So, et voila. That's my master plan I have found for Art of Fugue. So, you now have the result, also my result, you have the sources, and you have the way I went on. What do you think about the result of this first part from our discussion? Which ends here. I'm so curious. And yeah, that's enough for today. In next episode, we'll start filling our structure with life. It's a pretty challenging puzzle, and I'll show you of my own aberrations also in the very beginning of the score. Okay, if you like, we'll meet us then. As every time, thanks for being with me. Stay healthy, all the best, and bye bye.